Welcome, everyone. We're here for another Silk Road seminar, and I'm here with the remarkable Rick Repetti. And many of you know Rick because Rick and I have had many conversations. He's been on my channel. I've been on his channel. We've been on projects together. We did a thing on the philosophy of meditation together. Rick and Chris and Taylor and I were in Zagreb together doing presentations on some dialogical practices we've worked out, dialectic into dialogos and the Socratic search space. I thought Rick and I should talk, and what we want to talk about is I've sort of finished the European leg of the philosophical Silk Road, and I'm starting to turn my eyes eastward. And there's two relatively, one is very recent, one's within the last 2 or 3 years, anthologies have come out. One called Leaving the Cave and Entering the Stream, and the other is Neoplatonism and Buddhism, which just is a little bit more pedantic, but obviously they're both about the people now entering into deep reflections and trying to generate dialogos, and I mean that term, between Buddhism and Platonism, especially Zen Buddhism and Neoplatonism. And since Rick is both a professional philosopher who has had lots of training in all that Greek stuff, and somebody who does a lot of work on Buddhism and Buddhist practices, it seemed to be the perfect fit. So first of all, welcome, Rick. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure, and I always feel honored that you invite me to participate in these things with you. Good to be here.
So as I said, I've been advocating for this for quite some time. There's a long history of sort of precursors. There was a quite famous book at its time called Zen Catholicism, in which the author was trying to integrate Zen with Catholicism. And there was Zen Christianity by Johnson and others. And what I noted at that time is the aspect of Christianity they were plugging into in order to make those connections was the Neoplatonic strain within Christianity, the Christian mystics and Christian spirituality, which is thoroughly Neoplatonic in nature. And then, of course, the Kyoto school tries to bridge the other way from Buddhism into Western philosophy, and it centers on Heidegger. And I have been always interested. And for example, D.T. Suzuki makes a lot of use of Heidegger's use of Eckhart. And Eckhart, of course, is a Neoplatonist. And then there's lots of really good books that have come out recently. There's a growing, I wouldn't say consensus, but definitely a respectable camp arguing that Heidegger was a Neoplatonist, but he couldn't admit it to himself. I have been a proponent for what I call Zen Neoplatonism, which is a deep dialogos and a proper opponent processing between Zen and Neoplatonism. And just to get it started, because this is not going to be sufficient, the initial idea is a proper pluralism is when, each wisdom tradition can deeply learn from the other. And because each wisdom tradition foregrounds some virtues and backgrounds others. So, for example, Christianity has learned a lot about mindfulness from Buddhism. Buddhism could learn a lot from Christianity about the integration of agape and logos and things like that. And one of the things, the opponent processing between Zen and Neoplatonism is Zen can prevent Neoplatonism from becoming over-intellectual, and Neoplatonism can prevent Zen from becoming anti-intellectual. And they are both prone to those sins, if I could put it that way. So that's a bit of a preamble, and I have more specific thoughts about the theta square that came out of the philosophical Silk Road and how that compares to Satori and Kensho and things like that. But first of all, I just want to make space for you and initial thoughts about that idea.
Sounds fascinating. Great topic. You're doing excellent work in this, John. I've learned a lot just from watching some of your talks on this subject. I'm not as steeped in the history of Neoplatonism as you are, so thank you for educating me. But I know enough to have this conversation, number one. But number two, as you know, one of the very first, earliest, most powerful mystical experiences that I had was something like Plato's forms and
You,
Indra's net blended together. And you
you and me
too.
both.
Yes. And you
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
That's right. So, and this is, I mean, I started out having mystical experiences through meditation by accident. I just stumbled into it. And we've talked about that before. And those came out of Asian traditions, Indian yoga originally. But then I wound up getting into Buddhism and everything. And that led me to become an analytic philosopher, which
yeah,
is something that comes out of the whole Western tradition, which has a lot of the roots, of course, in Plato and everything. So in my psyche, I've got the Platonic aspect, which which of course, as you've talked about in the Meaning Crisis series, changed radically conceptions of rationality and everything. But
yeah,
so I've got both of these things in like who I am and who I've become for most of my life. I'm a kind of analytic philosopher and a like a Buddhist
yeah.
oriented mystic. So these are in my nature, and they've been kind of wrestling for many years. But since I met you, my attitude that used to be more like they're schizophrenic parts of myself, and I don't know which one. I heard Tom Cheetham saying I listened to one of your Silk Road things with him talking about the little guy on his shoulder that he can't get rid of, which is like the Western. For him, it was the reductive materialist, but for me, it's the
Yeah.
Western analytic philosopher. But after listening to you and learning about opponent processing, it's all becoming much more integrated in me, as you know. I just thought I would share that, so that like these two things are in my psyche. Whether or not I'm good in terms of exegesis and history, I'm not half as good about the knowledge, the propositional knowledge that you have about these things, but my intuitions are very strong in this space. So I'm sure we'll be
That,
able to have a great conversation.
yeah, and that's what I want to primarily address. I think the way, and by the way, thank you for saying that. That's very kind, and I'm glad my work has been helpful to you in that way. That's one of the things I want to afford. You're kind of exemplifying the intent of the philosophical Silk Road, to turn inner discord into kind of a sophroson of opponent processing. Um, and so
Yes.
you're exemplary, and of course you don't just exemplify that in sort of words. It shows up in practice. You had a tremendous amount to do with this, the development of the Socratic search space, the refinement of dialectic into dialogos, which are clearly Socratic, Platonic, practices, and yet you brought in the mindfulness element, the meditative element, the elements that more clearly are inspired from a Buddhist heritage, and you integrated them in, and you kept reminding us, Sati, reminding us about that continually, and I think to great benefit to both those practices. And so
Thank you.
it's born very significant fruit, and we're back from Zagreb, where we presented those practices, and I think to very good effect. They were generally very well received, which was good.
And we're writing
Uh,
them up right now, John.
we are writing them up right now. I'm leaving it to you and Taylor to finally resolve the issue about
Oh,
how
I
much.
think we resolved it. Well, I think we
Okay,
resolved
good.
it. The whole team who helped to create the Socratic search space, they're invited to take a look at our draft before we send it
Yep,
anywhere and make any
exactly,
tweaks,
exactly.
suggestions, whatever. So we'll be good. We're
The,
good.
the, the way we generate it and reflect on it and promote it is always dialogical, always dialogical. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I wanted to start then along those lines, and maybe I can do a little bit of helpful background in the way Platonism has changed in the Western scholastic arena, because the way I was taught Platonism would be in no way hospitable to Buddhism. I was taught that what Plato did, Socrates is trying to get definitions, and what we're trying to do is come up with definitions. Like Plato gave us the definition that knowledge is justified true belief, and things like that. And that what Plato developed was a theory of the forms, which have to do with abstract objects and a two worlds mythology that causes us to hate this earth. That's Nietzsche, and is the origin of nihilism, and that's Heidegger's Nietzschean reading of Plato. and that the dialogues are kind of, something that was easily dispensable, and because Aristotle leaves them behind. And now what we've seen is a complete sea change in which every one of those theses has been not only rejected but demolished by argument and exegetical work, and and the number of scholars that do work on this, it's just massively increased. And we know that what's going on is, Plato is pushing for aporia. He's pushing for a realization, a moment of the realization of the inadequacy of propositional thought, and an opening into perspectival participatory transformation, a kind of deep conformity, affining, reciprocal opening, anagoge, with what is most real. And that most real is also most good, but it's the good beyond being. So it's not the ethical good. It's more like, the good of the really real. And there's this, and the dialogue is not ornamental. It is central to the practice of Platonic philosophy, because it's about questioning, becoming questing, in a profound way. And that the two worlds mythology is exactly a mythology. It is not a theory. There are no theories in Plato. In fact, the theories, he dedicates an entire dialogue to criticizing the theory of the forms, called the Parmenides. And so what you see instead is that the two worlds mythology is what Wynn's book on the philosophical Silk Road. It was a gift. It was one of many synchronicities that just keep exploding. The renewing the senses, that Plato intends the talk of the upper world to be a way of recovering the sense of recovering the senses, doing what uh, Wright calls a sensibility transformation. Because we forget that you go up out of the cave, but you come back down into the cave. And Wynne talks about, well, what's it like once you've done that, and all the clues that come out from the Neoplatonic tradition. And he looks at James' work on religious conversion. And then connected with that is that we see, actually, Plato isn't doing theory. Behind theory is theoria, which, right, we've all learned, we should think about that as contemplation, not as theorizing. But then I did more work in Nightingale and Ward, and Plato is aware of this, and especially Ward does amazing work to show it, that the more ancient meaning of theoria is pilgrimage, to actually go on a pilgrimage. And Plato's anagoge should be understood as a pilgrimage, as a profound pilgrimage, where you're not traveling to another world, you're going to other places, other perspectives, so that you can return with new news that will transform those who belong to your home. And then, of course, that brought about the realization of the work from Charles Taylor that Wynne makes use of. Um, Taylor talks about where if you try to argue with somebody when they're in a particular framework worldview, you can't. What you have to do is you have to shift them to an alternative place, not a space, an alternative place, a different worldview, a different way of being and seeing, and get them to look back from that other perspective and see what was missing, or distorting. And then you move to another perspective and do that, and then you move to another one, and then you see the through line. And by doing that, you transform the person so that when they return back to the original place, they see it again for the first time, in a different and more profound way. And so I call that a metanoetic pilgrimage, as opposed to a premise by premise argument. And this, of course, is what's going on in Plato. Plato has the famous circumambulation around the form, right? We're doing this, and we do it dialogically, where each person could be thought of as a different place and perspective and presence on a pilgrimage that we're taking together towards the sacredness of what is most real. And now, once you start understanding Plato in that very musical, noetic, transformative fashion, and once you start understanding that he understands that ultimate reality, um, in aporia, something that is deeply non-propositional, is grasped in a kind of profound transformative insight that can't be put into words. It starts to sound, in a lot of ways at least, like a good peer and dialogical partner for some of the best of Buddhism and Zen. So that was my filling in, and we can go back to the
Wow.
theta square, but just to, because we have to disabuse people of a sort of standard encyclopedia, what I was taught in my undergrad about Plato, and I believe you were taught the same sort of thing. What we do is we don't read we'll read the dialogues, but we won't talk about that. We'll extract the arguments, and from the arguments, we'll extract the forms. We extract the theory of the forms or the theory of virtue, and then we'll criticize it using analytic tools. And that's what Plato intended us to do, which is all kind of bullshit. And so I've said enough. I've said too much, but I want to turn it back to you.
Wow. Yeah. No, you said a lot, and it was really beautiful. I'm going to go back and play that over and over again. I want to hear that a few times because that was so rich and well integrated, and what a great scope to the whole thing. I had so many ideas when you were talking. Let me start with the first one about our training. Not only that, it was worse. All that stuff, the dialogues, the forms, all that was kind of like, from these analytic philosophers' perspective, similar to beliefs in karma and reincarnation among Buddhists who want to be naturalists now. And they say, oh, that's historical, parochial, pre-intelligent beliefs that got incorporated. That's all stuff that we don't get. Socrates, Diotima, mysticism, none of that stuff. The Orphic mystery cults, we're embarrassed about that. Don't even focus on it. Forget about it. Same thing with Neoplatonism. And my education was so bad at the CUNY Graduate Center Philosophy program that they didn't care about the history of philosophy at all, or ethics, aesthetics, any of that. All they cared about was logic, language, and science. That's it. Philosophies of those things. So that's the kind of bias. But even my first undergrad teacher, when I mentioned to him parallels that I found between Asian philosophy and in Plato's Republic, his attitude was so parochially dismissive. I'm quoting him almost verbatim now. And with the facial gestures, Plato wasn't interested in the beliefs of some lice-infested cave-dwelling yogis. Yeah, this is the kind of bias that was in my education. So, and what brought me to philosophy was all this other stuff, and it was like completely eclipsed and rejected and everything else. So that also adds the schizophrenic part of my history that I mentioned earlier. But thanks to you and a lot of your work, that's all coming together now. Some random responses. One, Nelsonian Socratic dialogue, which you're familiar with, is this nice little thing similar to Socratic search space and dialectic into dialogos. There are elements in common, but that one comes out of the version of Plato and argument and logic and everything, like only that stuff matters because you take people's experiences and then you extract criteria and then you critique the criteria at the end, with counterexamples. And that's all in that propositional space, which is the only form of knowledge in that modality, which is why the things that we worked to devise or whatever and tweak and grow are really needed alternatives to that. Big difference between them. So, but I remember when I first told you about that, you love the idea of a cataphatic practice in the Nelsonian, and it has it's useful, but it's limited, very limited in that way. The other thing about dialogos being essential, or dialogue being essential in the Platonic vision, and the way that you were describing this, and the thing about theoria as pilgrimage, going to get other people's perspectives, it made me think of an Asian metaphor of the blind men and the elephant. So, in the non-one-sidedness doctrine of the Jains originally, the metaphor, the first use of this metaphor, it's been co-opted by other traditions, but the first one by the Jains is that it's just that each cognitive agent has access to some aspect of reality based on where they're situated and their history and everything else. So, and with the elephant, one's holding the tusk and they think it's a spear, et cetera, each holding a different part of it. And then in Jainism, they're into nonviolence, which comes out of that doctrine. Like, just because other people have other views, you don't have to hate them, right? But then it's not relativism. It's more like a pluralistic. The more access you have to the truth, the closer you get to it. So what I'm thinking about, the link with that metaphor is, the more blind men start engaging in dialogue with each other, they access more of the logos, of the real, that sort of thing. And the pilgrimage accesses blind men who are far away from you, who have
Yes.
radically, they're way on the other side of the elephant. There's another side to the elephant. Yeah. So the more of these things that you do, the more you're circumambulating the real, as Plato would say. So I just wanted to link that metaphor. It's the first time I linked
yeah,
the
I just
two
want
of them.
don't lose your train of thought, because I want to hear more of your responses. I just want to put in something there, because I've been thinking about exactly that metaphor. And I've been thinking about the contrast between pluralism, like I'm trying to understand in the philosophical Silk Road, and relativism. Relativism is an isolating claim. This is, here is a view, and it is locked and it is folded in on itself, like Augustine's definition of sin, when human beings are folded in on themselves, right? Whereas pluralism, notice the metaphor, all of the people and the pilgrimage are, yes, but although there are differences, there are ways in which they fit together without becoming homogenized. There's a through line. There, again, a Platonic theme. There's a through line through the perspectives, and we have to find the through line, which is not to find the definition of the elephant, but it's to find the way in which all of these different aspects belong together and can participate and be fitted together without trying to build a Hegelian logical system or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and one of the other ideas that just came to me, riffing on what you just said, this is a thought that I think I shared with our group at some point about dialectic into dialogos. As the logs are thrown into the fire of that practice,
Oh yeah,
each one gets a little closer, but it's still just a reflection or a shadow, right? You know, so we go, oh yes, this one is, we've refined this. It's gotten a little bit closer, a little bit away from the furthest shadows in the cave. But each one reflects somehow or another, like every shadow reflects the shape of the object that reflected the shadow. So now you're intuiting the shape and you're moving up and up and up, and this is anagage. So the more of those that you get, and they're all reflecting the same thing, that's they're accessing this through line to the real in some way. And yes, I love the idea of the sin thing. That's like closing off each Platonic cave. Everybody, right? Relativism. Every little cave is real in unto itself and not connected with anything else. And it's the final reality. That's this true for me thing, you know?
Or meaningful for me, or real for me. I've developed a heuristic that if it finishes with "for me," I generally regard it as pointing to a significant error. So go back to your more of your initial responses, but I just want to plug that in, because that was a convergence between your thoughts and mine.
Yeah, well, one of the other things that just popped into my mind, I think I said most of what I wanted to say initially. Well, the aporia, I have too many thoughts racing through my head all at once. So aporia is what it reminds me of, with the thing that I just said about the layers of shadows or reflections getting closer, is that this corny, cheesy thing I'm sure you've heard, that when students enter college, they think they know everything, but they know very little. And when they exit, if they're successful, they know a lot more, but they think they know less.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So this is the process that the more of the blind men's perspectives that you could take on by occupying their space. That's why the travel helps. You go and stand there in front of the Parthenon or whatever it is, right? And then just being there helps you with the imaginal, to tune in. So the more this process just works. And aporia, I think, the more that you get it, the more like Socrates you are. I mean, Socrates seemed to be able to manipulate all those reflections and the relations between them and still open up the moreness to everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that moreness thing is something highlighted in the Zen tradition.
Yeah, very much.
The
Yeah,
nothingness about everything. And so I'm just riffing here.
No, that's good. That's good. That's really sparking me. That's
I don't
really good.
remember what else I had to say. I had a lot of thoughts, but they were really transient.
So what coming to mind right away is
one more. I remember it. Wait, I'll just take a note.
Okay, I'll note my thought. I'll note my thought, and then I'll give you my undivided attention.
Okay, so I'm not advocating perennialism, which is sort of at the other end of the extreme, opposite of relativism in this domain, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the through line leads to this one eternal truth that everybody knows, No, but, and he might be a perennialist, but he was a Christian, John Hick. Yes. I remember reading him saying, and he was influenced by Kant, and he would call the real with a capital R a noumenal real, right? Yeah. But I remember him saying that whenever he did something that sounds like pilgrimage, he would go to a mosque, go to a Buddhist temple, go to a different, where in any of those places that he went, those individuals who were the most devout or pious or devoted versions of that tradition, they all seem to have some kind of aura of virtue about them, an aura of sanctity. And he thought, this is indirect evidence that they are in contact with something real with a capital R, because it's an effect that you see in all of them. Now, I'm rephrasing his thing to make it more sense to what we're talking about. But that's the kernel of his idea that I've never forgotten. I thought, this is true. I've seen this. When you meet a holy man or a holy woman or a holy person from any tradition, there's something about them. So even though they have these radically different doxologies, belief systems, radically different practices,
they're radiant.
They all seem to be,
they're radiant.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to they're circumambulating some aspect of the elephant there.
So that is directly pertinent to the philosophical Silk Road, because that happened to me. I've met many people, deeply devout people, who I hold in very high regard, like D.C. Schindler, you. And so I don't think either one of you would take this as an insult, what I'm about to say. But in Bishop Maximus, I saw what you described. And he was on the philosophical Silk Road. And I'd already known the bishop, and I'd spent time in the monastery with him. And, we regularly correspond, and he talks to me about his essays.
I saw your talk with him about the Silk Road. Yeah. I could see that in him. He's got a depth to him that is rare.
So the way the metaphor that occurs to me for trying to describe it is he's on a trajectory to theosis. He, of course, he is virtuously humble and modest about this. But he's on a trajectory towards theosis, and the light for that is refracted back through him to me like a telescope. I can see things. He's like a telescope for me. I could see things that I could not otherwise see before. And
the metaphor of light is perfect for this.
Yeah. And so I agree. Hick, interpretation of religion, the fifth dimension, huge influence on me. I have come to become very critical of Hicks's Kantianism, which I think has all kinds of problems. But that stuff about Hick, I think,
and his theodicy also is very, very parochially Christian.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that was coming up was I'm reading there's two thinkers that are becoming increasingly really important. I taught a course on one. That's one you've probably heard me mention, William Desmond, and he's basically reviving this Platonic tradition, but deeply within a kind of Christian spirituality, which is very Neoplatonic in flavor. Sorry, that was a very cumbersome sentence. And then, not at all. He represents, to me, he represents sort of the modern analog for Thomas Aquinas. He's the best that the Latin West is producing right now in terms of a philosopher theologian. I think 100 years from now, people will be talking about William Desmond. They will have long forgotten about John Vervaeke and Rick Repetti, but they will be talking about William Desmond. And then Christos Ionaris is somebody I'm just getting into, and he's basically the best. He's the analog for Maximus the Confessor. He's the best from the Greek East. And part of what I'm trying to do is integrate the two of them together. And both of them have something insightful to say about this recovery of Platonism within a living spirituality that then again sort of opens us up towards Buddhism. Ionaris talks about apophism, being apophaticism.
Apophaticism, yeah.
And he talks about it, and he said, the West locked it into negation, which is a deep, deep mistake, the via negativa. He said, and what he does instead is he says, no, it's not about that at all. It's about a constant recognition of the inadequacy of language and a realization of the inexhaustibility of being. And so just the glory of aletheia. Yeah. So, and it's like, and he says, and then when within that we have, and then the language is very careful in it, and we have to hear it very carefully. There's a communal criterion, not a definition, not an essence, not an essence, but a communal criterion of truth, because truth requires meaning, and meaning has to be generated dialogically. And so truth has to ultimately return to the dialogical matrix of meaning. And if it's not bringing the inexhaustible into that matrix, we put it aside and saying, however correct the propositions, that is not leading us into truth. And it's like, wow. Yeah, right?
I love that. Oh my God, I have to read that.
And then Desmond, as you know, I've deeply, and I want the two of you to talk at some point. I've been deeply influenced by James Filler's work on the deep critique of Aristotle's substance ontology and subject predicate logic, which is very similar to some of the critiques that Nishida and Nishitani make from the Kyoto school, influenced deeply by Zen. James's main argument, I know him, we talk a lot. Read his two books, everyone. Read his two books, James Filler. But he makes very powerful arguments that you can't get relations out of relata. They're not properties, they're not actions of relata, like all this stuff. And he goes through it. I won't repeat all those arguments because I've done that a lot. But then I said to James, I said, you can hear Pyro in here a little bit. I said, but James, there's a balancing argument here. There's an isosthenia. You also can't get relata out of relations for exactly the symmetry of argument. And he was like, and then I said, and then William Desmond I found out William Desmond has the same argument that you can't get, right? You can't get the relations from the relata. You can't get the relata from the relations. They both co-emerge in a codependent fashion. Think of Indra's net.
That's exactly what I was thinking, John.
Right. And this goes and this is the potential connection between Desmond and Ionaris. And Desmond says his word for that is community, like a Platonic dialogue, right? That is and then you see the communal criterion of truth, and you got and this is a deeply, both are deeply informed by the Christian Neoplatonic version of Platonism, but nevertheless a powerful and legitimate one, to my mind, a living one at least, that is so opening towards like some of the central motifs and metaphors you find in Zen.
Yeah, fascinating. Wow, this is really incredible stuff. Yeah, the convergence is absolutely spot on and perfect. Like you couldn't make that up. I had this similar intuition, and I've argued in some of my writings and in discussions with other Buddhist philosophers similar points when they try to go so far into saying all there are relations. Well, you can't have relations without relata, and it's got to be two ways.
Yeah, yeah,
And this is the same thing about. I think we've talked about this. Well, I know, yeah, we've talked about it a little, but you've talked about it a lot. The the argument against the self in Buddhism
yes,
makes a similar kind of confusion.
yeah,
That
yeah,
there's no node in the net
yeah,
that's your node. No, there has to be.
yeah,
But
yeah,
what
yeah,
its nature is processual and changing and so on, and so and interdependent and everything. Doesn't mean it's not there.
So I've sort of seen the argument as the sequence of arguments as a metanoetic pilgrimage. So you have substance ontology and the arguments about relationality being more primordial shift you over here, and you get to see, oh wow, substance ontology and subject predicate logic leads into all the nominalism and dualism and blah, right? But then you're over here, and like Taylor says, but once you're
It's the other
outside
way.
of the corral, then you can also look. Once you learn to look back, you then learn to look forward. You go, wait, and you go over here and you look the through line through both, and you go, oh, and yeah, that's and so I think of that as a metanoetic passage in that fashion. So
I like this idea that I like the idea of pilgrimage within your own psyche,
yeah, yeah,
and how that is afforded and enhanced by actual locational, what is it, geographical pilgrimage to actual places. This is a beautiful, beautiful idea. One of the things I wanted to bring up that's
please,
similar to the kind of confusion. I like the way you just did that about going from substance ontology to process ontology, et cetera, and how
yeah,
they're all parts of the elephant, right,
yeah,
John?
yeah,
They just
totally,
have to be kept in the right perspective, and the more of the parts that you see, the better the overall view that
yes,
you have.
yes.
Yeah, and there is this kind of anagoge through these different metaphysical kind of models or domains, whatever, however you want to parse that.
Well, to my mind, the more parts we have in concert, the more we get a sense of their common participation, and
I
that,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that came to mind that I wanted to share when thinking about like the confusion within some of the treatments in Asian philosophy about Indra's net and there being no relata or no self, etc. Related, kind of almost a performative contradiction or some kind of
yeah,
contradiction, is that
yeah,
the primary criterion in almost not only Buddhism, but good chunks of Indian philosophy in general for the real is causal power.
right, yeah, 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 yeah,
Right? And this is a scientific idea. If
yeah,
something can't be affected or affects something else, it doesn't exist. Right? So this is throughout Buddhism and good chunks of Indian philosophy, for something to be real. Like, okay, so the Buddhists reject the Atman. When they reject it, it's because it's described in like texts like the Bhagavad Gita and whatever as being inaccessible, unalterable, permanent, can't
yes,
be, it's immutable. So it can't do anything and nothing
yes,
can happen to it, right?
yes,
It's not, so it has no causal power, so it doesn't exist, right? So like that's just one example of the many, many causal criteria. I call it a causal ontological criteria. I've written about this in
that's good.
mainly in my book on Buddhism, meditation, and free will. Subtitle was A Theory of Mental Freedom. Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking about that. But then the Buddhist path requires causal efficacy.
Yes,
Agential. The agent has to do things
it's
to
part of the
grow.
fourth noble truth, right?
Yeah, effort, etc. Right.
Well, there's a way
So
out there.
these
Yeah,
contradictions.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
the
yeah,
way out of the cave. Yeah, the way toward enlightenment, and it's. So that's just something I wanted to bring up because
well, let's talk about that. I think that's really good.
yeah, the different criteria, like in Neoplatonism for the real,
Yeah.
And this is one of the criteria in Buddhism for the real, maybe not the only one, because
So,
there's the two truths thing that complicates things,
yeah.
right?
And
There's pragmatic causality, and then there's ultimate causality. And then it gets way too metaphysically complex.
and I always found that dichotomy extremely problematic because if the pragmatic doesn't fit into the real, why does it have pragmatic power? Right? Why
Exactly.
does it
Yeah.
have causal
Yeah.
efficacy? Why does it make sense? What they are
I've
saying,
done, yeah.
yeah, okay.
I've done a lot of, I've written a lot of criticisms about the two truths. Yeah.
So let's go back though to this central idea because
Yeah.
I want to I want to pose some things to you, and that gets us into this. Um, so I've been trying to well, I've been reminding people of something and then reminding them of something that had been lost, and I didn't even know it was lost because I just found out. So there's Aristotle's four causes, um, and then there's the Neoplatonists introduced a fifth, the paradigmatic cause. Um,
Right.
uh,
Right. I remember,
yeah, yeah,
I
and
forget that fellow that you had on that brought this up.
uh,
Yeah. It was
Michael
another
Leva.
P. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
another P, paradigmatic knowing too, right?
Yeah, yes. And
Yes.
so the idea here is, um, and I think, and I think this means there's going to be some. Uh, I have deep appreciation from your arrow, but I think she sometimes conflates the formal cause and the paradigmatic cause. So to give people a modern version of somebody invoking the paradigmatic cause is Michael Levin. Michael Levin says, okay, what we like. So Michael Levin has all this amazing, like you can watch it, literally watch the videos of if you remove the cell
Yeah.
from its bioelectric top-down communal, right, information communication, right, it can go off in all kinds of different development. So the idea of genetic determinism is gone. There's bottom-up genes, but there's top-down, right, constraint from the collective that have as much to
Yeah. And
do.
I think is he the one who says that what a cancer cell is one that's disconnected from the collective? Because there's
Yes,
no
yeah,
constraints on it from the
that's right.
community of cells
And,
that it's supposed to participate in.
yeah, and so you
It
can
just keeps
hear.
replicating itself. Yeah.
That's right. So you can hear the bottom up and the bottom up causation, the top down constraint, the shaping of actuality, the shaping of potentiality, or the shape. I now change it into the shaping into actuality and the shaping into potentiality, which I think is a little bit more precise. But what Mike does is he talks about, okay, but so there is and he now, by the way, I've been prodding him, and he now admits he's a
Yeah. He's a
Platonist.
Neoplatonist.
Yeah, 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 yeah. He
Yeah.
says there is, you know, there's an eternal realm of the forms, possible structural functional organizations, and then listen to his language because it's so computer metaphor. Well, what we do is we access that and then we download it, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about." That is modern language for the paradigmatic cause. And notice that we do it vertically. I'm somehow accessing this realm of like like really existing forms because they can act as real constraints, and then I'm downloading them as constraints into this situation so this cell takes this form in the formal causal sense, and then it is auto poetic and self-governing.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay. So Aristotle is only focusing on when it takes the form.
exactly, that's the formal
He's
cause.
ignoring, yeah, he's ignoring the
The
Platonic
vertical. Yeah, yeah.
form. Yeah.
The vertical causation, what that's what Wolfgang Smith called it, right, is missing in Aristotle, because for him, right,
Oh
he's
yeah,
only.
the efficient cause is what transforms the substance cause
Yes,
into its formal cause.
that's right. But
Yeah.
somehow the formal cause is doing something in terms of the final cause, right? And there's
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
So the reason I'm doing that is to go
Yeah.
towards
Yeah,
opening
where
up.
is this going? This is going somewhere, John.
Yeah, it is going somewhere. Um, the one point is Mike basically has the noose. He, because I said, well, that space of the forms has to be organized in some way so our relevance realization can reliably access it, or the organisms' metabolisms can. And he went, yeah, it has to be organized and it has to be accessible and somehow comport with life in mind. And I said, we sort of have a God there, don't you? And then he said, I have to leave the conference now. Goodbye. So which he did. I'm going to be talking with him and Jonathan this week. So that it becomes very Neoplatonic. But here's the now opening up to the Zen, especially when
Yeah.
I forget the author. Reading a book right now, very careful, convincing argument that Zen is a Buddhist form of Taoism rather than a Taoist form of Buddhism, which is the Taoism should be more prioritized than we have traditionally done. Why am I saying that? Now here's where the shoe drops.
Because the Tao has a kind of paradigmatic nature to it.
That's right. The
Yeah.
Tao has a paradigmatic nature, and what's also important is the reality, the eternal reality of shaped possibility. It is not the clay of the cup, but the space within the cup that makes it useful. It is right, the potentiality is as real because it is the
And that's
mother of form.
nothingness. That's
Yes.
nothingness.
Yes, exactly. That's the formlessness that takes priority,
The
but is not
emptiness.
distinct from form. And so now I'm playing with the Platonic term, form, eidos, but in Neoplatonism, you see this growing, yes, but the formless, the one, and they have a terrific problem, right? What's the difference between the formlessness of the one and the formlessness of matter? And by the way, I'm going to be talking to Zevi Slavin because there is a Jewish Neoplatonist, Ibn Gabaral, who basically said, well, they are one. There isn't a difference between them. And he turns everything on its head, and he makes matter one of the prime features of the essence of God by doing that.
Oh,
Because
wow.
yeah, it's like, oh, and he's hugely influential on Maimonides and who else was John on Erigena, like this guy's hidden. Anyways, do you see what I'm doing here?
Yeah.
Neoplatonism, sort of goes like tries to get everything it can out of form and intelligibility and ends up in formlessness. And yet in Zen, especially if you hear the Taoism, there's this great understanding of formlessness, but then a realization that it is non-dual with respect to form. And you and I think we agree that the two truths was an attempt to explain the relationship between those, but very
Yeah.
unsatisfactory attempt to explain. But do
Yeah.
you see what I'm doing here? I'm playing with
Yeah.
they're sort of one, like they're foreground, they're like duck rabbit Wittgenstein with each other, right? That's what I'm trying. Do you see what I'm trying to do here?
Yeah.
What I'm
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah. This is great. Oh, man. Just wow, John. I love this.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad you love it.
Well, yeah, the Tao and the 10,000 things are
Yeah,
not separate.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's what I mean about there can be a deep philosophical framework in where we mean philosophy the way Hadot means it, and you and I have always been talking that way, the love of wisdom, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
can do this profound pluralism, this dialogical opponent processing, right, between Neoplatonism and Zen, and that's why these two anthologies are now pertinent. Um, and then now here's the more provocative and slightly perhaps weird thing. You mentioned it earlier. These growing convergences, the growing sense of this, the fact that Jonathan Pajot, Michael Levin, and John Vervaeke are going to be talking very soon, and that seems perfectly appropriate and even needed. And to my mind, and maybe yours is different because you've been sort of on this in some ways longer than me. Um, that dialogue wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. Um, and I
Yeah.
feel like that,
Absolutely.
and for me, that's the primary criterion of the advent of the sacred, that sense of convergence that is happening within humanity, but is not being engineered by humanity. This convergence, which I try to symbolize with the philosophical Silk Road. And that to me is the advent of the sacred as our most promising response to the meaning crisis and its acceleration by AGI and social media and malevolent supercorporations.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think that this is just a coincidence,
Yeah.
personally. I'm
Yeah.
not sure about the metaphysics of Jungian synchronicity, but I'm not sure about the metaphysics of hardly anything, but that's beside the point. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean. It
Yeah.
does seem like there's something, I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to use it, almost providential about
Yes.
this
Yeah.
this emergence at this time when it's most needed.
That's a funny story because Bishop Maximus, we have become very close. Um, uh, our time together, and I said one of the things I went through Jungian therapy and I did dream work and I did all the workshops, and the synchronicities I would get would be few and boring and trivial, right? And there was like, okay, like, and other people would tell me of their glorious synchronicities, and I would just, oh well, okay, While I was on the Silk Road, and since the Silk Road, if I was a Jungian, I'd be saying my life is just booming with synchronicities. Or if I was a Persian, I would be saying serendipity is happening everywhere. I wrote that to him. And he said, and if you were a Christian, you would say it's providence. So that's what I said about, like, it's providential. Yeah, it feels like
Yeah.
that in some way. It feels, go ahead, please.
Al-Ghazali predates Jung, and I think he's not the only one, but he specifically said in that text that I thought Descartes might have
Yeah,
plagiarized from a little bit, in the first meditation of Descartes, where he talks about dreaming and waking,
yeah,
and Al-Ghazali says, and this is similar to the child, adult, and sage. Al-Ghazali says something like, in the sage's state of mind is to the waking mind what the waking mind is to the dreaming
oh,
mind.
that's beautiful. Yeah,
And he said, and when you attain this spiritual enlightenment, you have, he didn't use the word synchronicities, but you have synchronicities all the time,
yeah,
increasingly. And this is an evidence for him that you're progressing, is that you're having these kinds of meaningful
yeah,
coincidences
yeah,
that are not mere coincidences.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he said that from the inside, in when you reach a certain point, it's a different kind of knowing, that it's
Yes,
not just, oh well, maybe it's meaningful, maybe I wonder, I'm an empiricist. Like, no, there's a kind of gnosis to it,
yes,
that these
exactly.
things are happening in a certain way in your life, that it kind of has a kind of spiritual confirmation. I think that I'm putting
Uh,
his words into my own to try to share them better here.
Yeah, and Wynne does something very similar in Renewing the Senses, where he talks about those kinds of experiences count in a certain kind of way, and what we're wrestling with is to figure out how they count, and without
Right,
press.
the
Yeah,
metaphysics, yeah.
yeah. Well, and the epistemology too. Like, how do they count
Yeah,
while still without undermining our proper loyalty to Platonic Socratic rationality, right?
absolutely.
And I
Well, what
think
I say is, I've had a lot of those experiences, and
yes,
Socrates had them.
yes, very much.
He's one of my heroes. And when it comes to testimonial epistemology, he's got top
Yep.
value. Like, if
Yeah,
it was an
yeah,
Amazon seller, he's got 5 stars, Socrates.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Very trustworthy. Yes.
yeah, yeah, and that's part of, like, you've given these plausibility arguments,
Yeah,
right? So that transfers over to testimonial evidence.
I think
And
that's right.
within these spiritual philosophical traditions, there's a tremendous reliance on testimonial evidence
Well,
from the forebears.
so I think so I want to make a distinction between propositional and processual presuppositionalism. So I have a lot of respect for Plantinga, but he tends to talk about basic beliefs, and I have a problem.
Yeah.
But well, you saw the thing with Bishop Maximus, and he was doing Clement's version of faith as this as a form of presuppositionalism. But then I think, and he did not object. In fact, he was very like, oh, he liked it. I turned it from like a proposition into a process, which is the sensed presence of voluntary necessity, which is somehow like the elephant at the core of reason and love and beauty, and flow
That's
and
perfect.
resonance. Yeah, right.
That's perfect. That's beautiful. I love that imagery.
And that,
You
and
know,
it
go
sits well with
ahead. Go ahead.
faithfulness. It sits well with faithfulness. I just want to make one point. Don't lose your thought. So I'll pause for a sec. Put a pin in your thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it.
I wanted to say, I think there's a convergence between processual presuppositionalism, right, and testimonial evidence, because we ultimately always have to rely on testimony. We have to even rely on the testimony of our own memory. Like there is no way out. And this is where Yanaris's communal criterion of truth comes back again.
Look, Wittgenstein's private language argument.
Yes,
You say it
exactly.
all the time. We didn't invent language. Language is a
It,
distributed cognition system. It's an Indra's net level thing that a
yes,
whole
yes,
community speaks a language. Languages have all these taxonomic capturing of experience into ways of knowing that are propositional, but not only. There's also the processual or the procedural. A good amount of what gives testimonial traditional evidence within a spiritual practice lineage its value is the fact that those procedures work.
yes. Well, and this is
And
Wittgenstein.
that,
The use
yeah,
matters. And then the
yeah,
use, which is like procedural knowing through and through, by the way, depends ultimately
totally.
on forms of life, which are perspectival, because that's why he's doing all that
Yeah,
stuff on aspect shift, and participatory. It's a way of, right, forms of life. I'm
yeah.
I'm doing a deep dive. There's now a good scholarship on the mystical within Wittgenstein, and I'm reading through a bunch of authors talking about this, because
Oh,
I've
I'd
done
love
it
to
with
hear about
Heidegger.
that when you, yeah.
Yep. Well, what I want to do is I want to do a course on the convergence, or at least the dialogos, between the mystical within Heidegger that is now properly being recovered, and the mystical within Wittgenstein, the two great philosophers that have
Wow.
founded continental and analytic philosophy.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm always curious to hear what Wittgenstein thinks about when you kick the ladder away of
Yes.
language,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
metaphor
Yeah.
of his.
And what's interesting, because the mystical is quite pronounced, like, I mean, literally written in the Tractatus, but a lot of these authors are showing no, it's also running through the investigations and the notebooks in really, really powerful way. Um, so, so
Interesting. Yeah,
it looks like.
there's an element
Go
of
ahead.
aporia. One little thing. There's an
Go.
element of aporia in Wittgenstein with that problem that Kripke took up from
Yeah.
Wittgenstein. I forget the problem. It's a kind of hybrid of Kripke and Wittgenstein. I just can't. It's something about like the limits of logic and of
Yeah.
reasoning. But I know that there's an element, there's deep elements of aporia in Wittgenstein, and I wonder if that's
There are.
connected and going to show up in your investigation, because so much of what he's saying
Yeah.
to me is something that you would intuit when you reach moments of aporia, trying to make sense of that model that he ultimately rejects.
Yes. That's right. And
This
I
is a
think
kind
that's
of
right.
dialogical within his own. Well, he's also
Yeah.
in his head arguing with Russell and all these other people, but Frege and so on. Interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I think there's deep connections between the aporia, the aspect shifting, and the fact that he keeps crafting and recrafting an ascetic style of life as he sees what is, which he basically, he doesn't even argue. He just, I don't know, demonstrates or exemplifies as essential to being a philosopher, like, which is real, like, which is really interesting. Like he's putting as much effort, if not more, into his ascetic way of life as he is into his writings, which a couple authors are pointing out. It's like, oh yeah, and if we care about performative contradiction and not just propositional contradiction, we should be taking that into account. um,
I remember the name of the problem, Kripkenstein. People gave
Oh
it
yeah,
that
yeah,
name,
yeah, 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 yeah.
Kripkenstein. The other thing I wanted to talk about is orthodoxy and orthopraxy,
Yes.
or orthopraxis. So what differentiates these traditions is usually more orthodoxy, straight line
Yeah.
of beliefs. But within even different schools of Buddhism, there are some orthodoxy
Yes.
differentiations, but what's bigger is the emphasis on different practices,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
So, but that hick point that I mentioned earlier, there's so many similarities across practice traditions.
That's right.
These contemplative and meditative prayer, this, that, ascetic. There's a kind of, it's a heteropraxy, which there's a through line through it all
Yeah.
across most of these
Yeah.
traditions.
Yeah. I think so. And I think, I think so. Do you know what a Klein is? A Klein is like population variables. They sort of do a Wittgensteinian family resemblance. They overlap and shade, right? And I think there's a Klein in ecologies of practices, just like there's a Klein in ecologies. It's not like there's this one ecology and then it ends, and no,
Right.
ecologies, biological ecologies overlap and interpenetrate. They participate. They're parts. So
Yeah, this is a
ecologies
good one
form.
for like
Yeah, yeah,
Klein is what I was trying to grab at with this heteropraxy
that's right.
hick idea. Yeah,
Yeah,
very good.
yeah,
Yeah. And that all is related to Mike Levin.
yep, yep,
If
yep.
there is this reality, then the ways of accessing it are going to keep showing up across
That's right.
different
That's right.
traditions.
And that's what
Yeah.
Mike is he's a philosophical pragmatist in it, like in a committed way, like James. I have criticisms of pragmatism, which I've sort of made to Mike. I think it confuses relevance with truth, and you need them to be distinct from each other. Although they interpenetrate, they have to be distinct so they can correct each other. And I
Yeah,
also,
and you can't go too far with that, because then you wind up being Donald Hoffman, who says
yeah,
that
yeah, and you can't go too far with the continuum, because differences of degree have to become differences of kind, or you fall into Sorites fallacies, right?
yeah,
And so, yeah.
yeah,
So,
fallacy of the heap, etc.
yeah. So we've talked a lot, because I guess because of and maybe there's an egocentrism, but also just the prominence of the philosophical Silk Road for me. And so I've been talking from Neoplatonism towards Buddhism, especially towards Zen. And I like Zen because it brings in the Taoism as well in a really deep way, and strong cases being made for that, which I'm finding very, very persuasive. And because that's how I lived it too. I was always doing Tai Chi Chuan as I was doing Vipassana, right? So I want to turn it to you and do that. What would you say, as somebody who is perhaps a deep friend of Buddhism? Maybe that's the best way of putting it. What would you say about the Buddhists looking towards Neoplatonism now, rather than the Neoplatonists looking towards Buddhism? Well, what comes to mind, if, like, from a Buddhist perspective and identity? Um, what comes to mind when you take that stance towards everything we've been talking about? What comes to mind for you?
Well, you mentioned this from the very beginning, that the risk of anti-intellectualism,
Yep.
the eclipsing of of logos,
Yeah.
of logic, of reasoning, of dialogue, all that kind. The
Yeah.
power of all those things as what did I say? Heteropraxy
Yeah.
and even heterodoxy.
Yeah.
There's lots of ideas and practices in this whole Western Neoplatonic, et cetera, framework that can enrich um, a very often the Zen Buddhists, even more so than other Buddhists, are in a kind of narrow
Yeah.
vision of everything. It somewhat simplifies the complexity of existence.
Yes.
Samsara, nirvana, everything's the same. Don't worry about it. Just sit. you know, so many of the tools that could get people to have more transformative experiences that are more opening, enlightening, expanding, connecting. What I worry about, and this might sound horrible to a Zen Buddhist, but there's something like the isolation that we were talking about, and only my cave,
Yeah,
Zen Buddhist perspective, like this is the right view. Many people in that tradition have that view like that. They have a kind of
yeah,
monochrome or monovision about everything, that it's just what the model and the teaching says, and they're kind of
yeah,
not open to all this other rich converging wisdom.
yes,
So I think there's just a tremendous amount of amplification, to use one of the terms from dialectic into
yeah,
dialogos.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
would be good to have a Neoplatonist do amplification on a Zen Buddhist, all about their philosophy, and pull in, as much as possible to get them to have aporia, and then maybe be interested in the ways in which all this other stuff could be incredibly supportive, affording, etc.
That's helpful. I have talked to a Zen abbotess, and I said, I first asked, does Zen have to be attached to Buddhism? And she said, no, I don't think so. And she was that was a thoughtful answer, not a quick dismiss. No, I don't
Yeah.
think so. And then I said, well, don't you think there could be a Zen Neoplatonism? And then she said, yeah, I think there. And she was deeply intrigued. So I, I think what I'm just saying, there's resonance with some Zen people I've talked to about what you just said. Do you
Yeah.
think the other is the case? If Neoplatonism can sort of challenge Zen away from anti-intellectualism, um, can Zen challenge Neoplatonism away from over-intellectualism?
Yeah, well, just a funny image came into my head of the Zen master hitting John over the head because he talks too much about Neoplatonism with the cane,
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the
that's
answer,
right.
the short answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah,
We, folks like you and I, with our philosophical training, I suppose, and all the work that we do, we can easily get lost in a complex labyrinth of our own understanding and our desire to have the metaphysical models right and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And that's
definitely.
useful, it's helpful, but more important is, but you're already doing this and so am I. It's not you and I, it's other people maybe who are, let's say, in any of these Western traditions, who are not practicing
That's right.
things like Tai Chi and Zen, sitting and
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
what And there are seeds of this throughout Western philosophy too. People like, Wittgenstein saying, get rid of the ladder. Aquinas, at the end of his life, had a brief mystical experience. And he said, compared to that, all of my tremendous writings, Summa Theologica, etc., are like straw,
to be burnt.
right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, what we get from the Zen practitioners is just sit.
yeah, yeah,
Practice is important, right?
yeah.
Just sit. A. B, you don't have to hold all those things in your head when you're sitting. It's
No,
okay to let them go. In fact, you're advised to let them go
yeah,
so
yeah,
that you can transcend the. We're doing so much in this realm here, this little space of
yeah,
propositional knowledge right now, sharing
sure.
all this brilliant stuff. But when we practice, we want to have something more like theosis. And so, how do we
Yeah,
get to something like that? By just sitting.
yeah,
So that's my intuition is that, of course, both traditions can and should benefit from each other, but you can't tell other people what to think or do or want or value, right? We
no,
can just say, look, here's all these affordances. Are you aware of them?
yeah,
And then hopefully light bulbs go off. That's why I love that image of the light. I said, oh, the light is a great metaphor. You said that these people are like lights to you.
Yeah.
An image that came to mind about light, was it Shelley? Some kind of poetic phrase about the brilliant light of reality coming through stained colored glass. I forget this line in one of his
Oh yeah.
poems,
Yeah.
but it may very well be that the ultimate real is this brilliant light, like the sun that Plato says it's
Yeah.
like, and that it comes through every one of us and every little blind person, every little thing, and it reflected like different colors, stained glass, you know. And so when a colorless light goes through, or comes out of a light bulb where the glass is a little bluish, it casts a blue light. When
Yeah.
it's in a red light bulb, it casts a red light, etc. So that's the idea that I have. Like at the ultimate reality in Zen and Neoplatonism, it has to be the same,
Mm, mm,
and it's just
yeah.
being refracted in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
That's
just
great.
this is a Neoplatonic idea, right?
It
About
is.
the
It is.
one,
It is.
yeah,
And
and
when
all the
Newton,
shadows, every shadow, every reflection, it's all emanation,
yep,
right?
yep.
I'm
And
just
when
going on now, a little
no,
poetically,
not at all.
waxing poetic here.
And when Newton discovered that all the colors are actually in light, um,
Yeah,
that 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 really rejuvenated the metaphor in some powerful
which
way.
we never see in and
Yeah,
of itself.
that's right. We never see light,
Yeah,
and the Neoplatonists knew that through and through. Well, my friend, this has been glorious. We're going to turn it over to
yeah.
take some questions from the students on the lectern. But before we leave this public space, I always like to give my interlocutor any last words they want to leave.
Oh, no, this has just been wonderful having this conversation with you, John. We had a lot of fun together in Croatia
Yeah,
off the camera, but I also enjoy these conversations in this kind of forum. I really appreciate being invited.
for sure.
Thank you.
We'll have another one because we didn't get around to the four thetas,
Oh, yeah.
theoria and theosis, and the theurgia and theophany, and we'll come back maybe and talk about those, and maybe you could propose parallels or dialogical partners for that from the Buddhist and Zen traditions.
Yeah, and I mentioned the criteria of causality, and I
Yeah,
thought we could talk more about that too. I was
yeah,
curious
I'd
what
like
you
to do
thought
that.
about
Yeah,
that versus the criteria in the West. Yeah.
right. And the only so I did respond because I wanted to say that we have to broaden the ontology from cause to include constraint, and we talked about paradigmatic cause. And I think
Oh,
that's
right, right,
important.
right, right,
But I
right.
do,
Yeah, you
but
did.
I do think the more basic question of what are the criteria of realness,
Right.
and
That was the
because
more abstract question. Yeah.
yeah, because I think that's important because I have a sense that intelligibility is the key criterion in Neoplatonism, and I'm not quite sure what the corresponding one is in Zen of realness. Um, I
Yeah.
have some ideas,
Yeah. I
but I
don't know
want to think
about
about them.
Zen. Yeah, I don't know about Zen, but I know in most other forms of Buddhism, like Zen, because Zen is significantly anti-intellectual.
Yes,
So it
yes,
would be
because
hard
it's
to
very
figure out what the criterion is. Whereas in the other forms of Buddhism, there's this whole almost like analytic philosophy going on in the history of the
well,
other
there is, and
schools.
we could talk about that. I have a suspicion, and please note that word, that because I think Zen is more Tao than Buddhist, it's a Buddhist form
Yes.
of
Yeah.
Taoism. That
Yeah.
and in Taoism, the criterion of realness is flow. I think that's apparent, and I've been, right,
Oh, that's
and
brilliant.
right, and so we've got intelligibility and flow, and I think insofar as I see it in Zen, I see it as something like flow, but it's flow with a lot more emptiness in it or something like that. Sorry, that's just really convoluted.
That's good. Very good intuition, John. That makes
Yeah,
sense to me.
yeah. All right, my friend, we're gonna close it off. I'm gonna thank everybody on YouTube who is watching this. Um, um, the philosophical Silk Road is it's still reverberating through me. It's taken on a life of its own. It's becoming a way of life for me. I'm trying to seriously think about how to propose and encourage people to pilgrimage as a meta practice, a way of stress testing your ecology of practices. And so I want to thank all of you. Many of you have been either in person or via email or commenting, have been very supportive about this, and that's very appreciative. I'm used to a forum in which precise conclusions are what is rewarded, and being able to be in a forum in which exploratory gestures are appreciated is much appreciated by me. Is much appreciated by me. So thank you very much for all of that, and thank you again, Rick.
Yeah, and John, I mentioned this to you somewhere, I don't remember when, but that your whole Silk Road pilgrimage thing has inspired me to want to do my own
Good.
actual
Yeah.
geographical pilgrimages too. I mean, I've always had that in my mind, but it really became so much more important. And
Good.
I'm thinking about it also within myself. Yeah, thanks.
Good.
You're a trailblazer spiritually for me.
Well, thank you. There's somewhere in the New Testament where I think it's Paul recommends that we should be trailblazers. So that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.